Alright guys, let me know if you can see and hear the game at least, even though we can't do the Zoom call, which is a real shame, but I can see your chat, so yay, cool. Alright, well that's something. I mean, alright, so ask me questions. I'll talk about this game, and just, you know, we'll go back to how it used to be, which is a shame because I really enjoy being able to just chat with you and see you on the Zoom. That's really disappointing. But I really don't know what's changed. The only thing that's changed is that we've got a different console, and I know it's a little bit flaky. I've had some issues with this. I think possibly the power is a little bit flaky, and it's not generating a strong enough composite signal. And once it goes through the whole stack, it's maybe not quite strong enough for the capture card to pick up sometimes. And so it cuts out a little bit, a bit like what I was having last week with the Atari. But I don't know why that would explain what's going on with the Zoom. That doesn't seem to make any sense to me at all. I mean, yeah, I don't understand that in the slightest. So anyway, let's just do this. So let's have a look at what we're actually playing with here. So this is the Philips Videopac G7000, continuing a long line of, or initiating pretty much a long line of really weird and badly named video game consoles. Obviously in the States it was called the Magnavox Odyssey 2, which is much more inspiring, isn't it? But yeah, in Europe it was Philips Videopac Computer G7000. They did a few versions of this. The story of this console is long and tortured, and again, you know, I haven't done comprehensive research on it, but Philips weren't particularly behind the project. They weren't enamored with this whole thing anyway in the first place. So this project, I think, it was pretty much run by Magnavox. I mean, Philips bought Magnavox in a similar way to they bought Signetics. But they didn't put the Signetics chip in this console. This console had an Intel chip in it. So this was really, after buying Magnavox, their first attempt at creating a video games console. And then all of the Signetics 2650 projects were done in parallel to this, and slightly later. I think this project started really early, very soon after, obviously, Magnavox released the Odyssey, the original Odyssey, back in the very early 70s, and it is the prototypical, or the prototype, the Ur video game console, the first one, the first interactive games console designed for the living room and for families to play. And it's a fascinating machine. If you ever get to see one, there's a series of videos about the original Odyssey, actually, that are on YouTube. It's a research project at a university where they're actually playing it to see, a bit like we're doing, you know, how it works, and you know, physically what the affordances are of the machine and what you're supposed to do. But that's a whole other story. Magnavox also made a load of Pong clones, obviously, like everybody did. So they were raking money in with Pong clones up until the mid 70s. And Philips bought them in order to kind of get a foot in the marketplace. But they were also looking for, well, Intel certainly were looking for a new market for their chips. But they were really much more interested, and I think Magnavox were more interested in audio and hi-fi equipment. They did a lot of work with Dolby and produced custom chips for Dolby DACs and things. And obviously the hi-fi and high-end TV market was exploding in the 70s. Before the video game console market was really exploding, there wasn't really much you know, the huge demand at the time, and obviously the margins were really tight as well, because this wasn't a cheap chip. Unlike you know, what Atari did with the MOS, um, 6407, wasn't it? It was a completely different proposition. 6407 or 6507? I can't actually remember. Um, but but yeah, that was a much cheaper chip, and this was not a cheaper chip, and this was an expensive console, and they didn't sell very many of them, and they very soon wanted to close the whole project down. And they would have really, they would have wound the whole thing down within about, you know, a year or two of releasing it, after having only produced about 5 or 6 games. But there was a guy, Ed Averett, who worked for Intel, and he was a programmer and a sales guy for Intel, selling the chip, and he knew the chip inside and out. He had complete mastery of the processor, and he was convinced that it was still a viable project, and there was still that games were, you know, were interesting and profitable, and that they shouldn't just kill the whole thing. So he started writing games, and was for 4 years or so the only games programmer for the platform. And 24 of the games that came out for this platform were designed and written by Ed Averett in that 4 year period. And every game that he produced sold out and staved off the actual closing of the Odyssey 2 project each time. So it's kind of an amazing story. It really is, and it's really, you know, they're like with these other consoles. I've said before, there should be an equivalent of Racing the Beam written about each of these consoles, and possibly there are. I don't know if anyone's written a history of the Videopac or not, but it's a really fascinating story, and it's really interesting to hear Ed in interviews talk about that time and his approach to designing games, and how it was just this rich vein of creativity that he untapped because he had such mastery of the machine, and there was, you know, so much scope for innovation and to create things that he just knocked games out. You know, each game, I think 2K games he said would take him a couple of months, and a 4K game would take him about 3 or 4 months. And he was just continually doing this and selling them, and it's really as a result of that this isn't a completely obscure and incredibly rare object. But as it is, it's not. They did sell enough of them, and yeah, I picked this one up on eBay for 30 quid, I think, a couple of years ago, on a whim, really. It was kind of, you know, I didn't know anything about the machine, and I saw one for sale, and a friend of mine mentioned on was at the Southwest game computing museum, I think, and saw one of these in a cabinet and tweeted about it, and I was like, oh, I've always wanted one of those. I think they're interesting. I don't know anything about them, and there was one on eBay, so I bought it. And of course, it was useless really at the time, um, because it had no power supply with it, and the power connector. You can see at the back, the power goes in here. Um, the power connector is a kind of custom proprietary thing. Um, Obviously, it was RF video output. The controllers, which are also kind of quite strange things, they're self-centering, sprung um, digital joystick. So these are not analog. There are micro switches inside, or contact switches inside, and a fire button that says action, but they're hardwired to the machine as well. So it came, I think originally, very early, the joysticks were connected on a kind of Atari style 9-pin D-sub connector, um, but the majority of these machines, they're hardwired inside. So so I took it apart and cleaned it, and I did kind of a mega mod to this. So I I replaced the power connector at the back with a standard barrel. The power circuitry, there's actually a PSU built in here, so there's a transformer, and it normally takes mains input and is all transformed inside, but I just disconnected all of that. The board itself only runs on 5 volts, so it's actually a USB connector. So I've got a USB running into a barrel jack, and that runs into the voltage regulation circuitry on the main board, and that works absolutely fine. Then I've got it's composite modded, so I've got composite output. Obviously, it's dual mono sound, and I converted these joysticks to have Atari D sub connectors, and so there's two joystick connections at the back. I don't know if you can see that right down there underneath. Can't reach quite that far. And so so they're connected to the board internally. There's actually kind of connectors on the board, so they're hardwired through the case, but actually on like headers on the board. So I've done all that, which is quite cool. I then obviously had to rewire the joysticks because they were wired differently. So these cables aren't original. They're actually from a joystick extension lead that you can get that I've wired back into this joystick, which is quite fun. It means that I can use Atari joysticks or Atari compatible joysticks on the Videopac, and I can also play other Atari compatible consoles using Videopac joysticks, which is a kind of interesting experience. But yeah, that's the machine. So there's a lot of really interesting games for this. Obviously, the majority of games from its heyday, if you like, were all programmed by the same person, and so they're all kind of different. They're sort of all kind of the same in many ways. He had a kind of a pattern for how he made games, and the techniques he used, and he rearranged them into different arrangements and patterns for different markets. So he'd work with a marketing guy who'd say, who are we designing a game for this time? And this marketing person would say, oh, it's for boys, it's for teenage boys, or it's for teenage girls, or it's for families, or it's for mums, and depending on what the marketing guy said that they needed a product for the market demographic, he would arrange those those components that reflected his idea of what good games are, and into something that he thought was appropriate for that market, and that's how they did it. So we can look at some of those design patterns and some of the capabilities of the machine in a sec. But let's have a look at satellite attack. So this was called UFO in the States. As the original cartridge, you can see. Actually, if I flick this off, I can show you what a cartridge looks like. So these cartridges had handles on top, so you can plug them in and pull them out easily, which is kind of a nice feature. They all look like this, pretty much, all of the Philips ones. There are also some third-party ones made by Parker Brothers and some iMagic ones as well. But they have this kind of shape where they can slot together on a shelf. So you see how they've got this indent here at the handle. So they all kind of slot together, but when you slot them together, you're actually faced with a blank side, and you can't tell which cartridge is which. So I've made little stickers for the side of them. So on my shelf, they sit all like that next to each other with stickers on to show what this game actually is. So that's not original. That label on the side, that's one that I made. But I think this label here is original. I've made some other ones for cartridges that were broken and had torn labels. I sometimes can't tell the difference actually. But yeah, I think this is an original one. So this was game number 34 in Europe. I'm not sure what number UFO was in the States. But yeah, and it says reset and space to start. And unlike many other of these games, oops, make sure it's plugged in properly. This is where it doesn't start up again. I knew I shouldn't have unplugged it. Let's see. Is it going to come back? Yeah, there we go. Okay. So let me switch back to the game. Oh, marvelous. Okay. So it looks like the game hasn't come back, so I'm going to have to fiddle again, I think. This is